Take two. Check, check, check.
And we have success.
Boom.
Funny how Zencastr will screw with you sometimes.
It's true. Never trust a Chrome app.
Fair point. Very fair point.
You know, I was listening to as we're recording this, the last Mac Power Users, where David Sparks was talking to Jocelyn Kiglai, and she talked about how she uses Zencastr for all of her podcast recordings.
Yep.
And David mentioned, like, I'm not sure if I would trust a web app like that. As bad as Skype is, you know, I just don't know if I'm ready to put everything in a app like Zencastr. And I was thinking to myself as I was listening to it while I'm out for my run, oh, it's fine. It's solid. It'd never have any issues. And then, of course, today, the day after, we have issues.
My experience with Zencastr has been roughly the same as Skype getting on, but it's the same as any form of video software or audio software like that. They're always a little bit tricky to get them connected. It seems like once you get them connected, they're usually okay. The difference I have found is with Zencastr, it seems like it's a lot more stable once you're on, because I feel like Skype tends to drop me more often than Zencastr does.
It's true. Skype is pretty horrible. If only we knew a developer who could develop a Skype replacement.
I don't know anybody. Nope.
You don't know a guy?
Nope, I don't.
Oh, okay.
I don't want to touch that. that world, I don't even want to think about what goes into that. Like, that does not sound fun at all.
You know it is fun? Podcasting from your new home office like this guy.
Yeah? Okay. All right, I need some pics. I need pictures.
Oh man, you want me to do this right now?
Yes, I want it right now, because if you're going to bring it up, we have to talk about this. And I don't know I know what your bookcase looks like.
Give me 2 minutes while I put my headphones down and go take some pictures.
You don't even have pictures yet? Seriously, you haven't taken pictures yet?
Not current pictures. So there's new developments here.
Okay, and go.
This makes for great podcasting.
No kidding.
So this is kind of a long, skinny room, which is just at the bottom of the stairs in our basement. So this is like the corner of the basement that is built in like underground. And then the other side of it, like our house is a walkout ranch. So the other side is like bright and open, but there are no windows in my office. And I kind of like it that way.
Nice.
So everything that you see lighting wise in there is Philips BR30 hue lights. I have like 8 of them.
Nice.
And that's kind of cool because you can just select the modes and then, you know, help you concentrate, help you focus. Or in the morning, if I'm down here, be kind of chill. Definitely like those. The first picture, what you'll see there is that there's this weird little cutout thing. The couch that we have was just in the basement, but no one ever used it. So it fits perfectly in that spot. We put it there, but you'll also see there's like that weird lip. So there's a bunch of corners in that part of the room. So in that first picture, you'll see I've also got a bunch of acoustic foam to kind of eliminate the bass traps.
That's what that is. Yeah, I was looking at this thinking, okay, that's kind of an odd architectural detail, but now that you say that makes way more sense.
Yeah, so it's not a square room. It's kind of long and skinny. And then on that side of the room, there's a bunch of those like corners because there's that weird lip. And so it was causing some weird echoes. So
interesting. So putting those in the corners eliminated echoes.
It helps a little bit. I tried that actually before we put the carpet in, because it was a concrete floor and it just was not working. So we bit the bullet and we got carpet. You see the carpet in a few of those pictures. To the right of the couch is the standing desk with the fractures of the podcasts that I do.
Nice.
And then to the right of that, on the back wall is the bookshelf. And then to the right of that is a glass whiteboard, the closet, and then a couple more pieces of acoustic foam on the wall.
Just for fun.
Yep, because I had them.
Nice. I have some questions.
All right.
Okay, so number one, what on earth is under your desk? There's like these foot pedals there. What are these?
Are you familiar with the Apogee audio interfaces? Like I think the Duet, and then there's like a Apogee One, I think, just like recording
to
interfaces.
An extent. Yeah.
Okay. Well, this is the Apogee guitar rig. It's called the GIO. And so really what it is it's a foot controller for Logic for guitar players.
Interesting. So using that controller, you can alter the sounds that come out of your guitar.
Yeah, so with Logic, and I think it's called MainStage, to be honest, I haven't really messed around with it a whole lot because I've had this thing for a while thinking, I'll use this at church, but then decided that it was too much of a pain to bring my MacBook and get it all set up every single time. It wasn't working. So it's literally just been sitting at my house for a long time, and I haven't really started messing with it yet, but there's 2 rows of pedals on there. The top row is like your play, pause, record, forward, backward. So you can control Logic with your foot. And then the other ones where you see the lights, those lights will change color depending on the type of effect that you have. So in main stage, you can have like a delay, I think is purple, or an overdrive is yellow or something like that. And so you can select the different effects for your guitar input from that bottom layer. And then on the left and right side, there's like these little rubber pads. Those are for going up and down different sound banks within Logic and main stage.
Okay, that sounds really cool. I kind of wish there was a way to alter it such that like one of those an enter button. Here's one that is going to run this text expander snippet. Like I could easily see trying to use a foot pedal of sorts. I think there are some of these things out there. Anyway, that's what I got to thinking of.
You probably could program it to do that, but I've not gone down that rabbit hole.
Okay, next question. What is your monitor? Because this looks like a really large Samsung of sorts.
No, this is a cheap monoprice. I think what they call it is like a Crystal Pro or something. It's a cheap 4K monitor. It was like $300. I bought a monoprice 4K monitor a long time ago when I first got an offsite office, and it wasn't this exact one, but I still use it at the co-working space, and it works great. I've had no issues with it. I haven't lost any of the pixels. And so when it came time to buy one for here, I immediately went to monoprice again.
Nice.
It doesn't have like the camera. At some point, I'd like to get like one of those LG ones that has the camera built in. But this was $300 as opposed to $1,000, and it works fine.
Right. Interesting. Okay, so large bookcase, lots and lots of books here. How do you organize these? This is a question I don't think we've really gone over, but there's a lot here, and my assumption is you have some form of an organization method for these. What is it?
Well, that would be a good assumption, but it isn't true. Literally, I threw books on the shelves. I still have to organize these.
So you just got them up there.
Yep.
Call it good.
Yep.
All right, that's fair.
My wife wants to take the books and stack them different ways, like stack some vertically, stack some horizontally, and I'm sure it's going to look awesome when she's done, but she wants me to kind of organize them the way I want them first, and then she'll make them look pretty.
Nice. Yes, I'm jealous of this bookcase. Very much so.
It's a good bookcase.
Going on around the room, what is the whiteboard? I've heard of these glass whiteboards before, but I've not really seen one in the wild before.
This is a frosted glass whiteboard, which I think is like 4 feet by 3 feet. So it's not huge, but it's big enough. And I bought this, I think about 2 years ago when I originally was going to finish off this office.
All right.
And it's been sitting in our house, and I honestly forgot we had it until we started going through things. I'm like, oh yeah, I've got a whiteboard. We should put that over there.
Nice.
The frosted stuff is on the back, so it feels just like a glass whiteboard when you're writing on it. And so it cleans real easily, and it functions just like a normal whiteboard. I just think it looks cooler.
All right, last question. There's no chair here.
That is correct.
Which means this is a standing only setup. Correct?
At the moment, yeah. So the idea here it wasn't like the reason I set it up this way, but once I started putting the pieces in here, I kind of had this idea that if I wanted to sit down for anything, I've got a couch right there.
Yeah.
And I can unplug the MacBook and take it over there if I want to. It's literally like 3 feet away.
Nice.
Also, the type of work that I do, I don't necessarily need my MacBook. So I'm also trying to do, like, when I'm recording or when I'm working on something, I need my Mac. It's at the desk. And then if I'm going to be doing something else, doing that on my iPad and doing that over on the couch there, or even taking my iPad upstairs if I want to get out of the basement dungeon, the Bat Cave, I guess I'll call this. It's not dungeon. It's very nice.
Well, it looks like a pretty sweet setup. It looks like you have spent some time thinking through how you're going to use it and how you want it set up. So it's pretty cool to see that actually come into reality.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I originally said I was going to do this like 2 years ago, and then thought through everything, and then started it and stopped it.
Yeah.
And then, restarted it a couple other times. So I've had a couple iterations and thinking everything through.
Yeah. Because I remember you talking about this. Was this like episode 3 or something?
Probably.
Like it's been a long time ago at this point.
Yep.
And it's come up, I know, 2 or 3 times since. So kudos to you for getting it done.
Yep. Just to show you how dedicated I am to Bookworm follow-up. I mean, this goes back to Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich, the personal communication room.
Nice. That's okay. Now I have to look it up. How far back is that one? Think and Grow Rich. Not as far back as I thought. That's episode 34.
Yeah, I probably mentioned it before then, but that was the time when I was like, okay, I'm really going to do this. And you're like, hey, I'll come over and help you throw up drywall.
Right. And then you never needed that help. So,
well, I probably needed it, but I didn't do anything with it.
That's fair. All right. What else we got on this follow-up list?
Okay, so you have on here, for me, look for opportunities to alleviate the suffering of others. After Viktor Frankl, I really don't know how I can mark this as a success,
right?
Other than to just try to keep thinking about this. But kind of along with this, there's another one on here for developing my seeing skills. And I've been doing this picture day thing in March. I feel like those two together have been working. And I don't have any specific examples of like, this is how I alleviated somebody's suffering. And I don't think that unless you were to follow up with that person, have an in-depth conversation, that they'd even admit to you that was actually what happened. But I've been noticing people, noticing what they're feeling, what they're going through. I mean, if you ever just go to a coffee shop and people watch, like, it's pretty clear when people are dealing with stuff. And so just trying to be on the lookout for that. And when I have the opportunity to step in and do something, even if it's just simple as like make eye contact with a stranger and smile at them.
Yeah.
I've seen that sort of thing, like just break stuff off of people. And I've got lots of opportunities to do that throughout my day, even when I do work from home in my in my bat cave.
Yeah. I've been following your pictures. It's been entertaining for me. So
Cool.
I've enjoyed watching for sure.
I've noticed, not that I really care about the likes anyways, but I noticed when I started this, getting a ton of likes. And then I think people are getting sick of my pictures because now I only get a handful of every time I post a new one, which I don't care, whatever. But I'm probably not going to keep going with this. I'm going to finish out the month. And then at that point, whenever I've got something cool to share, I'll share it. But I'm not going to try and keep that cadence of, posting something every day.
Right. I know, like, I am not a frequent Instagrammer at all. And it seems like whenever I've had like a 2 or 3 month stint where I didn't do anything and then I post something out there, it gets a lot of feedback. But if I post something again the next day, it doesn't get anywhere near that. It's like, okay, it seems like people want to comment and like on something as a way to encourage you to keep going. And then when you do keep going, they're not actually going to do that anymore.
At that point, they're like, okay, go away.
Yeah, now I'm done. Okay, I don't want to see your kids anymore. Like, stop. Take pictures of the dog this time.
Well, that's been the little bit difficult part of this, is that, like, I don't consider developing seeing skills just being like, I'm going to take pictures of my kids. That could definitely be an aspect of it. But what I've been trying to do is just notice the cool stuff that's just around me all the time that I would just walk by and never notice before. So you'll see, if you were to go on my Instagram, lots of pictures of like outdoor wall art and things like that. I'll be out for a run. I'll see something that looks cool and I'll stop and take a picture, that sort of thing.
Nice. You ever take a picture of yourself doing yoga?
Nope.
I kind of want a picture of this.
No. I have not had a second yoga session. My wife has threatened to come up with a routine for me, but it hasn't happened yet. I'm still open to trying that, but yeah, like I said originally, like I don't think this is something that left to my own devices this is going to stick, but I see the value in it. So hopefully Rachel will listen to this and help me out.
Well, I've got a couple on here. One is directly mine, and that was to add transcendence to my weekly review. So a time to really think about the projects and the things I have going on in life from a higher level and try to see them from without. How do you say that? Outside of myself, as a third person, second person, however you want to say that.
Above and slightly outside your situation, as Sam Carpenter would say, and work the system.
There you go. I'll go with that. That's what I'm doing in my weekly review. I've done it a couple times now, and it seems to be working pretty well to get a view for what projects do I have going on and which ones should or shouldn't I be doing. So it seems to help in that sense, but I want to keep going with it. So I'm probably not going to keep it on the follow-up list, but I'm also not going to say it's done. Can I cheat and do that?
Sure. Can you give an example of what you're looking for when you do that?
Yeah, essentially what I'm wanting to do is make sure that the ventures and the projects that I have going on are the right ones. And if you've listened to me for very long on pretty much any podcast, you know that I have a tendency to say yes to things. New and shiny gets me excited, and I'm off to the races. Well, that can mean I have a lot of ventures running all at one time, and that's not always a good thing, because saying yes means you need to say no. So that's a difficulty that I know I have to work through. And the hope is that by trying to see these ventures and projects that I'm doing from someone else's point of view, that I'm able to get a clearer picture on which ones are the right ones, given the missions and goals that I have for myself. That is the intent, and that is something that I can do on, say, a monthly basis, but trying to do it on a weekly basis makes a lot more sense because it moves faster, and that is not something I've been real good at. So here we are, putting it on a weekly review, hoping to make that work.
Do you just then take each project that you're committed to and say, should I still be committed to this? Or is there some other framework that you're using to evaluate these? Like, what does it look like when you get above and slightly outside your situation and you apply the transcendence to your weekly review? Is there a process you follow to do that?
Not really.
That's fine.
Because I don't want to lock it in.
Yep.
Because the couple times I've done it have been very different each time. Both had roughly the same effect, but I came at it differently depending on what I felt like I needed at that time. And the only consistent thing I've had across those two instances was looking at my list of projects and looking at some of the longer term missions or goals that I have. Like looking at those two and then basically grabbing a whiteboard marker or a pen and paper and just writing whatever seems to come to mind. Well, one case I didn't even do that. I just kind of stared at a wall and thought through it. So I don't really have a set process on this one.
Okay. Well, the reason I'm asking is I feel like I've kind of gone through something similar myself recently. So I'm going to paste something in the chat here. And this is something that I put together and I've been using, you'll be happy to hear, pen and paper.
What?
The last week or so.
Did you design this or did you find this thing somewhere?
I did. I designed it because at some point I'll have somebody do a good design. But I just wanted to play around with some of the elements that would contribute to me hitting the mark every day. And so describing what Joe is looking at, and no, I'm not ready to make this available to everybody yet. I created a document. It's like a letter-sized document. And I actually have these printed off and made into tablets, so I just rip one off and fill it out every day now. But the way that I make sure that I'm moving in the right direction is I take the life theme that I identified in a different bookworm follow-up item, and I put that at the top so I see it every single day. And then I've got hour blocks on the left side of this from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. or 9 p.m., I guess. So I would block my time for my meetings and where I'm going to be, what I'm going to be working on. That would be right there on the left-hand side of the page. And then on the right-hand side of the page, I've got my goals, 1, 2, and 3. These are blank intentionally because I think that having to write them out every day is important, and it's going to just ingrain it in my head that this is what I'm working on.
Yep.
And then MITs are most important tasks. So things I absolutely want to get done today. And I've got space for up to 5 of those. I don't go for 5 every single day. Then a short little space for what would make today awesome. And then at the bottom third maybe of the page on the right-hand side, I've just got notes. So things come up during the day, I can jot some notes down there. Then a Bible verse at the bottom, which is going to lead into probably a discussion for today. Ephesians 5, 15, and 16.
Yep.
In the Amplified, therefore see that you walk carefully, living life with honor, purpose, and courage, shunning those who tolerate and enable evil, not as the unwise, but as wise, sensible, intelligent, discerning people, making the very most of your time on earth, recognizing and taking advantage of each opportunity and using it with wisdom and diligence. So just a reminder, basically, that what you do during the day is important.
I like this. There's one glaring problem with it, though.
What's that?
It starts at 7 a.m.
Yep. That's really designed to start after the morning routine. But for people who get up super early, yeah, you would ideally at some point be able to adjust that yourself.
Okay. Yeah, I like this. I'm intrigued by this a lot. I don't know if I would use it, but it is very intriguing. I've looked at some of these things. What's the other? There's a classic one, Emergent Task Planner, something like that. Anyway, I used to try those, and although they seem to work okay, I struggled with where to keep the piece of paper throughout the day because I move around a lot. So it was a difficult thing for me at the time because I wasn't carrying a notebook around. But I am now. So this may be something worth trying. Thanks for sharing this.
The inspiration for this, by the way, I was going through an online course called Working Smarter for Mac Users, I believe, by Dr. Mac, Bob Levitas, who I first heard about because he's going to be the keynote speaker at MacStock. I bought his course and went through it. And he referenced a couple times, if you're not familiar with this guy, like if you see the videos, he's got like long, curly, silver hair. He's in every one of the videos, he's got some different Hawaiian shirt on. He's a very colorful personality. But he talked a couple times in that course, because there's a big productivity aspect to it, about this thing that he developed, and he just called it Super Plan. And he's like, you can download it for yourself. And I looked at it, and it's got a lot of the same elements that I've seen in a lot of different planners. And then when I saw the fact that like he had put this together, I thought to myself, why don't I just make one the way I want it?
Right.
Because I've tried the self journal. I've tried, lots of different other things. And some of them I've liked better than others, but all of them have had some pieces where I'm just like, I don't really want to do it that way. Like my big thing with the self journal is the morning and evening gratitude. That's great if you'd never practiced gratitude before. But once I got in the habit of that, I much prefer to incorporate that into my journaling template in day one at the end of the day, rather than having to write it physically. So I kind of viewed this as an opportunity. Like, I know all the pieces I'm supposed to have here. Why not try to format them and put them into a design that I would like to use every single day?
I like it. I've debated doing something like this a number of times. I even went as far, okay, this will tell you how bad this is for me. I even have, still in my possession, a folder that has paper in it, like a bunch of, what do they call that? Sample paper from a local printer, so that I could figure out which paper I like the best to go into a notebook, so that I could print it with something like this and have it bound on the specific, in this case, fountain pen friendly paper. I never went through with it because that gets expensive quick.
Yep.
So I never actually did it, but it's been an interesting thing to explore. So keep me informed on this one. I'm very interested in it.
Sure. Yeah. And at some point, maybe I would do something like that. But because I'm like, well, I'm just going to test this, see if this works for me. It worked for this other guy, and I know that a lot of other people really believe in this process, but I've never found the tool that I can use consistently every single day. So I designed this in a couple of hours and printed, I think, 200 of them at Kinko's, got them made into tablets, and it was like $25 or something.
Nice.
Very minimal investment. And already since I've done that, I've noticed there's a couple things on here that I've wanted to change.
Right.
And so the PDF I sent you actually is a little bit different than the one that I have printed, but that's okay. I just want to beta test it myself.
Well, cool. This is very neat. I'm jealous a little bit. Just going to say that.
Well, feel free to rip off my design.
I have one more bit of follow-up, and this is from a listener, John Wittig, and he sent me a link. Well, it started off as a picture of a chart that intrigued me greatly, and I asked him for a link to this that I could share. So he sent it, and what this is, and I'll make sure this is in the show notes, it is a spreadsheet that John put together, and it has all of the books that we've done for Bookworm, Mike's rating and my rating, and then a combined rating, so that you can see which books, and it's got the bar graph that goes with each one. It makes a visual out of the ratings that we have for each of our books, so you can visually see which ones have the highest ratings and which ones have the lowest. I was really impressed by this, so thanks, John.
Yeah, this is cool. It's also interesting to go back and see what we rated stuff and then thinking about how we would rate it now. So like, for example, very first book we did was Getting Things Done, and there were a couple things that I didn't like about it. I ended up giving it a 4. You gave it a 5. Like, do you still consider that a 5 now that you've got 40-something episodes under your belt?
No, I think if I were to go back, I would make it probably at least a 4. Like that's probably where I would land on it, looking at it now. But that's the thing with stuff like this, is how do you actually, like, staying consistent is incredibly difficult on something like this.
And it's also hard to stay consistent when you're evolving through the process. Like the first book that we did, Getting Things Done, we picked that one because we were familiar with it.
Right.
A lot of these other books that we read, some of the ones that, we each gave a 5 to, like, had never heard of before. Managing Oneself, Decisive, Deep Work. Obviously, I kind of guessed that one would be up there. Willpower, Instinct. Yeah, we've gotten a little bit pickier as we've gone along. I also thought this was interesting, and I had mentioned, I think, in a text message when you first shared this with me, like, it might be kind of cool to have like the top 10 books we've ever done on Bookworm based on a chart like this. And so at any point, maybe you could go to the page and see these are the top 10 books, and it would be updated based on this chart. That's probably a lot of manual work. So I guess we'll have to wait till the listeners ask for that sort of thing. But that's the other thing I noticed from this, though, is that like if someone is new to the Bookworm podcast, it'd be cool to have a resource where they could just go straight to the books that we consider really good.
Kind of like a top 5 running list for Bookworm.
Yeah, exactly. Because I've heard from a lot of different people that, this wasn't really the intention of the podcast when we started, but people tend to listen to us deconstruct it and then decide if they're going to read it based on whether we like it or not.
Right.
So that's kind of cool, but also big responsibility, I guess.
Yeah.
I feel kind of sobered by that realization. Whether or not you're going to read this book, which might change your life, depends on what you hear us talk about. Like,
yeah,
better be on my A game whenever we sit down to record, I guess. But just looking at the chart, like that's naturally where my eyes gravitated to. Is like, oh, what are the top books? Deep Work, Managing Oneself, Decisive, and it'd be cool. I'm sure I'm not the only one who's got that question when they look at all the books that we've covered for Bookworm, and that list continues to grow.
Well, thanks to John for putting this together and sparking that.
Yeah, thanks, John.
It's very interesting. All of that said, today's book, What's Best Next? My choice, this is by Matt Perman. This was highly recommended to me by a new internet friend, Chris Bowler, who I've been reading a lot of ever since, when was this? Probably about 3 months ago, maybe longer than that. I don't know. You have to tell me, Chris. But this book is one that kind of struck me because I didn't realize someone had written a productivity book specifically from a biblical perspective. So there's your disclaimer for today. We're going to talk about God and the Bible a lot, especially here up front. So just going to put that out there. So this is something that I'm very intrigued by. I have a feeling that we're going to have some strong opinions about this one.
Yes.
Especially some of the later parts in this, because they have it broken out into, 7 parts, including an introduction and a conclusion. So this is something that I'm interested in your take on it, Mike, but at the same time, this is a book that I found very interesting, and I was fascinated by it, especially whenever you start reading like some of the testimonials on it, and like the tagline on it is how the gospel transforms the way you get things done. So yes, I'm interested in going through this conversation with you.
All right. Yeah. So let me, before we dive into the book itself, two things. One, preface this, like if this is the first episode of Bookworm that you are listening to, they're not all going to be like this, but this is going to dive into specifically the idea of faith and the spiritual why behind all the productivity things. So if that's not your thing, go back and check out one of the other episodes that we've done. Second, I have a little bit different perspective to this book because I did actually write a productivity book from a biblical perspective.
Yep.
Not a full, like, this is everything productivity-wise based on the Bible. So it's different than this, but that does influence and color my approach to this book. So I want to get that out of the way, because there are going to be some things that I disagree with in here, but it's basically because I've done research myself and arrived at some slightly different conclusions, but there's a lot of stuff in here that I completely agree with. Mine is, thou shalt hustle. It's really a biblical approach to productivity, but in terms of like doing more than you thought you were capable of. And at the time that I wrote it, there wasn't so much emphasis, at least I wasn't aware of it in the productivity space, of just like being more busy. And ever since then, there's kind of been the push towards effectiveness, minimalism, essentialism, all that type of stuff, which I completely agree with. And so that book is definitely due for an update. But yeah, it's apples and oranges in my opinion.
Yeah, I think when I consider, because oddly enough, I don't really think of your book as a productivity book for some weird reason. Not really sure why that is, but I don't. I think of it more as how to understand the way that you operate in the world per the Bible. Like, that's how I tend to think of it.
It's basically an appeal to think bigger.
Yeah, that's a good way to say that. Though you wrote the book, so you would know. So.
Right.
All right, so let's jump in today. What's best next? This is, I mentioned earlier, it goes into 7 parts. The introduction is really about, does God care about getting things done? And I think we would both agree, yes, God does care. And there's a lot of passages, one of which you read just a minute ago, the Ephesians 5:15 through 16. That is a core verse that Matt uses in this. And he has a lot of scriptural references that call out different aspects of how and why God expects you to make the most of your time here on the earth. And that is a thing that I think I could say I was aware of, Mike. Like, I think that's something I could say I knew, but I don't think I understood it to the level at which he calls out here.
He talks about, at the beginning part of this book, a little bit about his story and his own productivity journey. And he mentions that on page 25, his wife and he had 2 kids. It wasn't going to be possible to keep working the way that he was working. He was working 90 hours a week. And really the point that he's making is that kids are often the catalyst for change, which I completely agree with. That's kind of what made me stop and think about, why am I doing all the things that I'm doing at that point? And I think specifically with the longer work weeks, when you don't have a lot of other responsibilities, you can justify working really hard on these things. But when all of a sudden you are wearing a bunch of different hats and you're being pulled in a bunch of different directions, you have to start saying no to stuff. And that's really the heart of this book, in my opinion. This gospel-driven productivity that he's talking about is like, you have to take a step back and you have to ask yourself, for every area of life, are you doing what you are called to do in that particular moment? Are you doing the thing that you were created for? Are you doing the thing that you're anointed for? Are you doing the thing that, like, God has put this purpose and this mission in you? And really, like, the revelation for me was when I realized that I had that, it was then time to take everything that I did and magnify it under that glass and say, okay, is this thing in alignment with where I'm supposed to go? Is this thing in alignment with my life theme, is the way I would phrase it now on that worksheet that I put together. But you have to ask those questions. And when you ask those questions, you arrive at some answers, which usually, that's why I wrote my book, is I started asking those questions and arriving at these answers. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I can't believe no one has ever realized this before. Like, people do realize it, but they have to go through the process for themselves. And so I think it's cool right at the beginning here, the introduction, he's explaining his journey and his perspective, where he's coming from, because it helps you relate to his situation and you understand a lot better the context with which he's presenting all this stuff.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. So stepping into part 1 here, first things first is the title of it. He goes into, right towards the beginning of this, there's a parable in Matthew 25. This is the parable of the talents. And if you can't recall the story, this is where there are 3 servants, and the master gives each of them a certain number of talents and then leaves for a while and comes back to see how they did with it. The first of which had invested that money in something, we don't really know what it is, and essentially doubled his money. And of course, well done, servant. The second one did something similar, didn't earn as much back, but still had a pretty good return. And that was considered an excellent thing as well. The third, however, essentially just took the money and stuck it in the ground so wouldn't lose it, and just returned the money back to the guy saying, here you go, I didn't lose anything. And he was the one that was ridiculed in the process. And when I think about that story, and I think about, the first things first, like getting the foundation laid here, we are expected to be, I guess, efficient and to be productive with what we are given and not just sit on it. Like, we're not supposed to just sit back and wait for things to happen and expect that God will make people come to us in the conversations to help lead them to Christ. Like, he's not just going to let that happen for you. You have to actually do something before those things will happen. So I see this as an encouragement to don't sit on your hands, get to work, go do something. Don't squander what you're given, I guess.
Yeah. So I have thoughts on this passage.
All right, go.
This is really the core of the reason why I wrote my book. Is I was studying this, and I've got a Bible college degree. I was teaching a Bible college class at the time on personal management, and I was going through this parable of the talents, and a couple things really stood out to me. So first of all, the story goes, the first guy who got 5 talents, and talents represent an amount of money, it says that he went and got to work immediately. And that kind of shows me, because it doesn't say that about the second guy, that this guy who had gotten 5 talents in the first place, like, he was qualified for 5 talents. Like, he had increased his capacity to the point where he could be trusted with 5 talents. The second guy, and this is this set a bad tone for me right away, because in the book, he talks about how the second guy got 3 talents and he went and made 3 more. That's actually wrong. If you read the passage, he got 2 talents, not 3.
Nice.
So, and I'm probably the only one who picked up on that because I literally wrote a book on this specific passage. But like that didn't put a good light on everything from that point forward. It made me question basically everything that I read after that point.
Yeah.
But the principle here is that the guy who got 2, he did what he was supposed to do. It doesn't say that he went and got busy right away. He doubled what he had, and that's the principle here, is that God works by multiplication, and so it doesn't matter how you start, it matters how you finish. It doesn't matter if you are 50 years old and you feel like you've wasted your talent up until this point. If you start working what you have right now, this principle multiplication kicks in and you can quickly find yourself further than the person who started with the 5 talents if they're not going to be faithful. But the key here is that you have to be faithful. And I actually, at my church, I got an opportunity to preach about a week ago. And I actually taught on the principle of agreement from this particular passage. And so just real briefly, I think that there's a lot in here that you can dissect. But one of the things is that the guy who went and got to work immediately with the 5 talents, like he had proven himself to his master or his boss. So his boss is like, here's 5 talents. I'm going to leave, but I know you're going to do the right thing. And he did. He went and got to work immediately. So like he's completely on board with the vision or the direction of what the master or what his boss is telling him to do. And I think that that's a really powerful concept when people understand the mission or the vision that God has placed inside of them, like the specific purpose that they have for them. There are other people who will wrestle with it, and they know that the best thing they can do is to do what they were created to do, but maybe they want to do some other stuff first, or they want to try a bunch of different things, and they're going to figure it out for their own. I kind of view them as the guy who got the 2 talents. Yeah, eventually you're going to land on it, you're going to do it, but maybe you'll waste some time in going through some things. The very best thing you can do, in my opinion, is to understand what God has created for you to do, what he's anointed you to do, and then do that with everything that you've got. The quicker that you do that, the better off you're going to be. And then there are a lot of people, like the guy who got the 1 talent, he probably knew what he was supposed to do, but his boss left. And so he's like, I'm not going to do that anymore. Like if the boss had been there, he maybe would have followed through and did what he was supposed to do. But the fact that he's unsupervised at that point, like what that shows me is that that's like the lowest level of agreement. Okay, so you could call yourself a Christian. You could say that I believe this, this, and this. But really, do you? Like when no one's looking, what are you doing? Because the lowest level agreement is like to compel somebody, where you can force them to do something. I can compel my 4-year-old to do something, but he'll have this look on his face, like completely disgusted. And at that point, like he's only doing it because he has to. And then, you take a step up from that and you've got the people who are obedient. I can tell my older kids, hey, clean your room. And they roll their eyes at me like, oh, fine. They go and they do it. I don't have to monitor them, but they're not really on board. And then the highest level is the agreement, or, someone says, hey, go do this. You're like, yes, amen. I completely agree with that. Amen literally means like, let it be so. And you can really locate yourself in your attitude with what you believe God wants you to do. And if you find yourself like not knowing what God wants you to do, in my opinion, it's because you're not really paying attention. Like you're not asking the right questions. If you really ask and you say, hey, what am I supposed to do? And you take the approach that he mentions at the beginning, like your whole life, your whole mission is to help other people and to advance the gospel, like you'll figure it out. It's only when you don't really want to in the first place that it takes a really, really long time.
This is a story that I think you can really pull a lot out of, and you can continue to find different ways to tie it into life. But I think there's something to be said for starting the whole book with this, like starting the legit part of it with this, because you really have to understand that from a biblical stance, we are given a mission, and to fulfill that mission, we're also given a lot of stories about ways to follow through on what God wants us to do. And this is not complicated. It's hard to put it into real life, I would say. But that's a lot of what we talk about in the productivity space, is all the little tips and tricks on how you get things done. And he has a lot of those here in this book. But I think starting with the concept of how are you going to come at this and why should you come at this productivity thing with the goal of helping other people, and why should you come at it in a way that you're trying to be efficient, you're trying to be effective, you're trying to be productive with the things that you're doing, which he gives you your mission. And in this book, Matt gives us a mission, but that mission comes from the Bible itself. And we'll get into that.
I think that a lot of people kind of view like, well, the fact that I don't get to choose what I do necessarily, like if I'm really going to do what God called me to do, like maybe it's something I don't want to do. I think that's the attitude that a lot of people have. It's kind of like the please don't send me to Africa thing. But really, like the passions that you have and the desires of your heart, you know, like that's what God wants to give you. And in my experience anyways, like you're no more satisfied than when you are in the will of God and doing what he's created you to do. Like something inside of you comes alive when you do that. And I think that that's a very important understanding. Like a lot of people will kind of tiptoe around this and they won't want to dive into it because they're afraid that God's going to tell them to do something that's completely radical and against their will. And in my experience, like that's just not the way that it works. So then that ties into this efficiency versus effectiveness, because you can work efficiency, you can do things well, but if you're not doing the right things, in essence, it's a little bit of wasted time. What you need to do is you need to be effective and you need to hit the mark. All right, so on page 43, he talks about this from Peter Drucker. By the way, if you were to read whatever book it was by Peter Drucker that he mentioned, and Peter Drucker maybe like, I know it's a lot of essays and things, so maybe it's like the big one, but if you read that and then you read the Scott Belsky book, and then Jonathan Edwards, you'd have most of what he talks about in this book. But side note. So Peter Drucker says on page 43, while efficiency is important, it works only when we make it secondary, not primary. It doesn't matter how efficient you are if you are doing the wrong things in the first place. More important than efficiency is effectiveness, getting the right things done. And this is important because there are different levels of effectiveness. There are different consequences associated with doing the wrong things. You know, so why focus on effectiveness over efficiency? Number one, you can get the wrong things done. Number two, efficiency doesn't solve the problem. Number three, becoming more efficient can actually make things worse. The more efficient you get at something that you're not supposed to be doing in the first place, the more you validate it in your mind. You say, oh, this isn't so bad. But when you make that switch and you do the thing that you're supposed to be doing, then you're like, oh, I can't believe that I stayed so long trying to make that thing work. It's because you're focused on being efficient instead of effective. Number four, the quest for efficiency often undermines the true source of effectiveness in any organization. The people. I totally agree with this. And Chris Bailey talked about this, people being the reason for productivity. Number five, efficiency is often the enemy of innovation. Yeah, if you can do things better, you can apply the Band-Aid fix and you don't have to answer or deal with the tough question of should we be doing this thing in the first place. And then number six, the quest for efficiency often overlooks the importance of the intangibles, which are now the main source of value in our knowledge economy. This is a really interesting point and gets into the whole idea of knowledge work, which I did not know was a term that was coined by Peter Drucker way back in the day. I kind of figured knowledge work was something that came about with the internet and working remotely, but it actually goes back a lot further than that. If you think about that, if you don't have somebody managing you, looking over your shoulder, it's kind of like the parable of the talents all over again. What are you going to be doing when you don't have somebody who's forcing you to do the thing that you're supposed to do? It's hard to force yourself to do the right things, but you have to. You have to be effective. You can't just be efficient.
Wow, there's a lot there. I think we've talked about like this effective, efficient thing a little bit in the past. I don't really want to beat a dead horse here, but this is something that I know, and I guess this goes back to like this transcendence thing that I'm doing. It's very easy for me to continue to add projects and continue working through scheduling and time on the calendar and how am I going to fit all this stuff in and how am I going to get from one thing to the next and how do I manage my projects and how do I keep track of my list, like all of this stuff. It can be a lot and I could be the absolute best at managing all of that and making sure I'm getting things accomplished, but are they the right ones? And that's exactly why I wanted that transcendence bit. Because I'm not always certain that I'm pulling that off the right way. So I'm grateful for having this reiteration, even though I just had this as an action item from the last go around.
One of the things that he says on page 49, which I think is a great way of summarizing this, is that one of the best places for efficiency is being efficient with things so that you can be effective with people. And when you view productivity through the lens of gospel-driven productivity, where it's not about you and what you can get, like that's amplified.
Right. And that's the second part here. Nice segue there. Gospel-driven productivity. What does God want from you? And what does this thing look like in one sense or another? And he had a definition for productivity. Productivity is about making a contribution and giving more than we get so that God gets the glory, not us. That's on page 71. I really appreciated essentially a biblical definition of productivity here, just because you can see definitions of this all over the place, and none of them really, they don't mean a whole lot to me. Maybe that's just me being, a stick in the mud, but whenever I stopped and started thinking about this, okay, from a productivity stance and from a biblical stance, how do those two mash up, and what is the purpose? Like, what does God want me doing? Even though, I'm really good at computers, what am I supposed to do with that? And I think we've said this a little bit before, your ultimate goal should be helping other people. And that is what we should be doing. And when I'm looking to do good for other people and building my systems in my life such that it makes me extremely good and effective at doing that, that's the sweet spot. That's where I want to be. So I really resonated with this part. I think this was probably one of the more valuable pieces in this book, at least from my viewpoint. These first 2 or 3 parts here was where I really saw a lot of, I guess, original or unique things that I haven't really delved into before in a book, especially not from a Bible stance. You may have, given that you wrote a book similar to this topic, so you probably didn't feel that way.
Well, I have the most notes that I took on this particular section. So I feel like this section is really well done. There's a couple things in here that I've got some nitpicks with, but overall, on page 75, he quotes John Wesley. He says, "Do all the good you can, by all the means you can, in all the ways you can, in all the places you can, at all the times you can, to all the people you can, as long as you ever can." I think that's gospel-driven productivity in a nutshell.
Right.
He makes the point that good works should not be on your someday maybe list, which I think for a lot of people, they are. There's a principle of sowing and reaping, which he doesn't spend a whole lot of time on in this particular book, but I think the same thing applies here as it does when it comes to giving. Because, there's a lot of books, not even Christian books, which show that the people who are the most generous do the best. One of the books that he talks about is Love is a Killer App by Tim Sanders, which I've read as a gap book. And I'm guessing that if this section impacted you, you probably want to read because he referenced it a bunch of times.
I have it next to me on the desk right now.
Awesome. Yeah, it's a great book.
It'll make it to the list here before long.
Yeah, I love that book. But the thing that really is worth calling out here is that you can't just say, once I get to a certain level, I'm going to be able to do these good works. Or once I get to a certain level, I'm going to be able to start giving. I just re-listened to an audiobook, The Art of Exceptional Living by Jim Rohn. And he quotes, I think it's Luke 4, with the people who are coming to give their gifts to basically giving their offerings in the temple. Jesus is watching. And there's this old woman who comes up and puts in 2 mites, two pennies, basically. And he says, "You see that? She gave more than anybody else." And Jim Rohn had some really great insights on this particular passage. He basically said that you can't just wait till you have a bunch in order to start giving, because what matters when you give is not the amount, it's the amount of yourself that it represents that matters. And so Jesus is able to say to that woman who gave the 2 pennies, that's all that she had. She gave the most of what she had. She essentially gave in faith. And then when you give in faith, when you perform the good works in faith, when you're productive in faith, not because you're going to start doing this when you get to a certain level, but I'm going to start right now with what I have. That, I believe, is what gets God's attention. And at that point, he's that's the person who is doing the most of what they have, going back to the parable of the talents. That's the person who I want to give the 5 talents to, because they're going to work this thing and they're going to produce the harvest and the fruit from it.
You're talking about building character here. Like that's exactly at least what I'm hearing is when we look at productivity from God's perspective, it has more to do with the mindsets and the character traits that you build in yourself as opposed to the technical things that you're doing. And you see this all over the place. People who do good things for the exact wrong reasons. It's very easy to say that giving is an excellent thing to do and it always comes back around, but I have seen and heard of stories of people who give so that they can manipulate their way into a position. So it's like, okay, well, it eventually does bite them in those specific scenarios. But I think what you're talking about is if I want to be full of integrity and I want to help folks genuinely in a way that helps them long term, not just here in the moment. Now, I'm not saying that's bad, but it seems like to me things are better when you can help someone in a way that will continue to help them even after you've had that initial contact. So those character traits are ones that I think are extremely important and valuable and are spelled out in a lot of detail in the Bible, but they're not always easy to build. And with this gospel-driven productivity stance, like that's what we should be focusing on, is building these character traits versus trying to build in all of the technical systems that get the right things done. Like I get, maybe you don't get the difference there, but those two things I think can be things that work together, but don't have to.
Yeah. So E.M. Bounds, who is a Christian author, said at one point that man is always looking for better methods. God is always looking for better men. And I think that's the principle that's at work here, is the doing the good works, the giving in the offerings. And it's not just like giving in an offering at your church. Like this is really at the heart of my looking for opportunities to alleviate the pain of the people around me, is like there are so many opportunities. And Galatians 6 verse 10, I believe, talks about how we should be giving for every good work, like every good work. There are so many opportunities to give to a good work. But according to that verse, like that's what God wants for us. He wants us to be able to give to all of those good works. And that's kind of the challenge to me, is like buying a coffee for the person behind me who I know because I saw them walk in is going through a rough time. Like that's a good work. Recognizing all those opportunities and then showing myself faithful so that I can have more means in order to do that. But I think that you have to have the mindset shift before the means come. Like that's kind of what I was talking about with the generosity and the Love is a Killer app by Tim Sanders. And even a lot of people who aren't Christians, like they work this principle. There's a lot of philanthropists out there who like that's their mantra, is like find the need and meet it. But for a lot of Christians, it's like, well, we have to go home and pray about that first.
Yeah.
And that's one of the talking points that I have on here. I mean, if you're listening to this, you kind of know, I think, probably where Joe and I land on a lot of political issues. But this is one thing where I think that the conservative right could really learn from the left, is like the left is really good at thinking about the people who fall through the cracks and the people who need some help. And the Christians are like, well, no, I should have my own stuff. And no, like get your eyes off of your own situation and your own problems, and invest. Really the heart of this book is invest in what God wants you to do. God's heart is for people. God's heart is that no one should perish, So that means that if you are all in with the will of God and you are a faithful steward of the 5 talents that he's given you, why wouldn't he double that and say, okay, now I'm going to give you more, and you're going to have more to meet, more opportunity to give to those good works. I think that all you've got to really do is work that system. And I'm challenged myself because you can view stuff from a scarcity mindset. A scarcity mindset, and this really isn't covered in the book, but a scarcity mindset says like there's only so much to go around. And so if I give something, then that means I'm not going to have enough for this stuff over here. For people who aren't Christians, like they get this, the more that I am generous and I give, the more stuff comes back to me. Like it's a spiritual principle, I believe. And at the root of it, the root of generosity, he points out in this book, is love. Now, Ed Cole, who's another author that I really like, he said that love is the desire to benefit others at the expense of self. lust is the desire to benefit self at the expense of others. So if we really say that we love people the way that God loves people, then we should desire to see them benefit even if it costs us something.
I don't know how to add to that. That was really good. Well done, Mike.
That really is like the heart of the character versus technique. You know, like the technique or the efficiency doesn't matter. It's the character or the effectiveness that really does. And that kind of gets into this next section here, GTD in Philippians 4. So I'm curious to get your perspective on this, because he uses this passage from Philippians 4 where it talks about the peace of God, and he's equating that with mind like water, getting everything out of your head, and that's in essence making your requests known to God. I do think that this ties into the things that we were just talking about, because if you have the heart of love and if you are putting other people first, then you can make those requests known to God. You can say, hey, God, I want you to help this person. And if God says, well, I told you to go do it, like go do something with it then. But once you make those petitions known to God, like he's basically saying at that point, you don't really have to worry about it anymore, because that's when the peace comes. That's when the mind like water comes. So does that make sense? What's your perspective on this?
Yeah, I felt like he was stretching a bit at this point. Okay.
Me too.
Get it out of your head. But he's referring to get it out of your head verbally. And what I tend to think of is like, well, that's great. I could say out loud the tasks that come to my mind, but that's not going to get anything done, and I'm still going to forget them later. That's what I was thinking of. Like, I'm still going to forget this, even though I verbalized it. It felt like he was saying that you need to say it out loud and let God take care of it. And I don't think I would disagree with that. But if the answer to that is, Joe, go do XYZ, I need to have that written somewhere, because Joe's brain is not real great at remembering things. So, I don't know. I was conflicted by it. I get what he's saying. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think, and something I've started doing as a result of this book is just praying over my task list for the day, which sounds ridiculous the first time I thought about it, but it makes perfect sense when you stop and think through, like, okay, this is a list of things I'm here to do today. Why would I not talk to the creator of the universe about it? Like, I have this direct contact with God. Why would I not sit down and say, okay, here are the things I'm thinking about doing today. Is that a good thing to do, or do you think I should change that? And depending on your perspective, you'll get answers right away, or you may not. And I think there are a lot of different ways you can interpret things. But personally, I feel like whenever I do that, I sometimes have to change what I have on that list. And I'm totally cool with that, because my days are usually way better whenever I make those alterations than if I try to ignore them and go my own path. It's almost like God knew better, huh? So I don't know. That's my thoughts.
I just feel like this is a really important point that's worth discussing, because I kind of disagree with the characterization of, well, all you need to do is pray about the things that you do, and then you can forget about it and just go about your day, which is kind of how I read it. Maybe that's not exactly what he's saying. But I understand, like, you need to be able to have that peace of mind without having everything under control. So there's an element of surrender that needs to happen here. But I also think that you can't just throw your hands up in the air and say, well, I prayed about it, God will take care of the rest.
Right.
So like Proverbs 27:23 says, know the state of your flocks. And I think a really important principle here is by Dwight Eisenhower, plans are worthless, planning is everything. Best part of having a plan is being able to chuck it. And I think personally that the order here matters. So if you have your list and you go to God and you say, God, here's what I'm planning on doing today. If there's anything you want to change it. That is very different than approaching God with a blank slate and saying, God, what should I be doing today? Tell me what to do.
Right.
And I think that also the reason that this is so hard for people is it's never just like the hand coming out and writing on your whiteboard and telling you exactly what you're supposed to do. It's not the audible voice just saying, okay, thou saith the Lord, Joe, you shall do X, Y, and Z today. This can be a little bit difficult, but I think the real key to making this work is pray without ceasing. So that doesn't mean that you are constantly praying every moment of every day, but it means that the lines of communication are open for you at any time. So it's a minor point or a minor clarification, but it makes a big difference in my opinion. Like, you don't just come to God at the beginning of your day and say, what are the things that you would change here? Yes, do that at the beginning of your day. Absolutely. And in fact, that gets into another point later on, which we'll talk about. But also, like, having an ear open throughout the course of your day so that God can interrupt you at any given point and say, go do this instead. That's really the important thing. And that kind of ties into my action item from last episode of looking for opportunities to alleviate the suffering of others, because I've had it happen before where I've got my plan, I'm going to work on this thing. And then God says, no, you're not going to do that. You're going to call this person. And I call him like, oh man, I'm so glad you called. And we talk for an hour because that's what they needed at that particular moment. That's the stuff that really makes the difference. And if you just approach God as like, okay, I need your approval on this before I go work this, like, you miss out on those opportunities. But that's a learned skill. I mean, communication is something that you have to do consistently with anybody. So it doesn't matter if it's developing a consistent prayer time or if it is consistently communicating with your significant other. Like, you have to learn to communicate, and you have to learn to understand the voice of the person who is speaking to you, learn exactly what they're saying. And that takes time. So really, there's no easy solution to this, but I would say that if you really want to stay in the will of God and be able to be led by God at any given moment, you have to at least leave that door open. You have to have that mental approach that, like, God, you can mess this up at any given moment.
And I think that plays into the third part here. The third part here is define. And the only real question here is, what is your mission or vision? And I think we would both agree that it's very clear our overarching life mission is to make disciples. Like, that was given to us by Jesus himself. Like, this is your goal. And I think what Matt would get into is how is your specific life play into that? And how do you define that? There are tons of books and tons of ways to go about figuring out theoretical life missions. Go, meditate on a mountain for 3 months and you'll get it nailed down. Like, that just doesn't fly, because it's going to flux, it's going to change. Your skills will continue to morph over time. You'll go through different seasons. The different areas that you need to apply your focus will continue to shift. And that's all okay. Like, that's fine. And this is where I've got one action item here of defining my life goals in a little more clarity. Like, I have these general areas I want to improve on, but I've never actually sat down and nailed down, okay, in the next 3 years, this is what I want to accomplish, or this is where I want to be. So I kind of want to shift to that point and get some of that clarity, the cleanness of having that, because I don't currently have that. But that's a piece that I want to work towards.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of different ways that you can approach this. And I feel like in this book, he did a pretty good job of outlining a framework that you could use. He's even got like the sheet that with all the different sections.
Right.
But I feel like there's a little bit more here than what he went into in this particular section. So yes, your mission or your vision is about other people, but how you identify your specific mission, what you were created to do, is a little bit different. No, so he makes a point, you don't choose your purpose, you discover it, which I completely agree with. Proverbs 25:2 says it's the glory of God to conceal a thing and the glory of kings to discover it. So I believe that, like, God's placed these things inside of you, and it's up to you to discover them and tap into them. I believe that your mission statement should be tied to, another way to say it would be your unique ability. That's the thing that I had sent you a little bit ago. It's from a book that I'm reading, which is put out by the strategic coach, Dan Sullivan. And I believe that unique ability, that's a very important piece of your God-given vision. Something from my own personal study on this topic recently, I believe that when you tap into your God-given vision, when you understand your unique ability, it'll do a couple of things. Number one, in the Bible, there's a story of Joseph. He had the vision. He held on to that, and he went from the prison to the palace, okay? I believe that your vision will take you from the prison to the palace. And number two, your God-given vision is always a solution to someone else's problem, not just your own. That's why the first piece, why I believe that, because it's not just about you. God wants you to be faithful. He wants you to be trustworthy. He wants you to be a good steward. But then once you've proven yourself, then he will give you more so that you can make a bigger impact. And that's going to look different for everybody, but it's really, really important that you're not just trying to become efficient with the 2 talents, that you are so focused. You need to get focused on doing the right thing so that you can qualify yourself for the 5 talents. And there's different ways that you can do that. One of the things that he talked about was like, if there's a section in here, if you don't know your life goal, there's a couple of things that he mentions. You could do what you know with excellence, which I completely agree. You can move forward imperfectly, absolutely, adjust and repair. You can increase your opportunity stream, absolutely, I 100% agree with that. 100% agree with that. And then he also says you could do what you love. This is the one I a little bit disagree with. And that's based on my research into the word passion, which is usually what people think of when they hear the term do what you love. But the root word of passion is the Latin word pati, literally means to suffer. So doing what you love could be framed that way, but I don't think it comes across that way. It's not really the things you enjoy doing. It's the things that you are willing to suffer to see come about. So maybe you really do love something and you really want to see it come about, and you go through some things in order to see that happen. Okay, but that's completely different than just saying, I like doing this thing because it's fun and that's going to lead me to my life goal. Maybe, or maybe that's the thing that could be keeping you small. He mentions also on page 177 that you shouldn't be 30 years old still trying to figure out what to do with your life. I felt bad when I read that because that was me. And I think that it's worth calling out that you shouldn't be discouraged by that. Like, life is literally adjust and repair. You try some things, you see what works, you learn from your experiences, and you try to do better. And I think that you can apply that to your spiritual life as well. You can say, like, God, what do you want me to do? And believe that God told you to do this thing. And if you do it and it completely fails, then dig a little deeper. Understand why that failed. Maybe you missed part of it. Maybe there was something that you overlooked. Maybe it's just something that you have to keep trying at. You know, Solomon famously in the book of Proverbs says that he offered 1,000 sacrifices, and then God came down and asked him, what do you want? Just name it. Well, what if he quit at 999? You know, and he said, this doesn't work. Okay. So sometimes you do have to make sure that you're doing the right thing and then just push through. But other times, you know, if God didn't author it, he's got no reason to support it. So you need to ask yourself, is this the right thing? And that kind of gets back to the transcendence thing that you talked about at the very beginning. But
right.
I don't think you can put an age limit on this is the time that you should have this all figured out by.
So part 4, architect, time mapping and routines. And then you've got a rant. So the first 2 here, time mapping, hyperscheduling. You and I have talked about this a little bit, but Matt Perman spells out this whole concept of putting together like a template week. I've done this before. I'm not going to do it again just because it doesn't always pan out the way you want. But he does recommend, you know, here's a base for what your week should look like. And then he does spell out like putting routines into that so that your week and your time map is a routine, and trying to get those to the point where you can basically get to where you're operating on autopilot, which is kind of nice. I mean, that's what I do in the morning. I've got an evening routine that does something very similar. I've got a shutdown ritual I do towards the end of the day, but he spells out one that I have not attempted until, what is this, a week and a half ago? I tried it. I dropped it right away. But this morning routine of, what did he even call it? Like a productivity routine of sorts. But it was essentially, you know, clearing out your inboxes and getting 1 or 2 really important tasks accomplished before you get into the craziness of the day. Essentially, it's a morning routine for your work day.
Yep.
That was the way I took it.
Yeah, he called it the daily workflow.
There you go.
And that was one of the 6 core routines that he talks about here. And this is really where my rant comes in, because I think the order of these is very important. So number 1, he says, get up early. Staying up very late is not the same as getting up early, my personal opinion. Number 2, daily workflow. Number 3, weekly workflow. Number 4, prayer and scripture. Number 5, reading and development. Number 6, rest. Okay, so number 4, prayer and scripture. I feel like this is so important. And It's got to be number one. This is
Right.
non-negotiable.
Right.
He even says in this section, alternatively, you can do it later at night before heading to bed. And I put as my comment, 1,000 times no in all caps. Because there's a principle here.
Let me ask this, when do you do this?
I do mine first thing.
Okay.
So I will wake up and I will grab my phone, not to check my email, but to go through my Bible reading plan. I've got a discipleship group at my church with a bunch of guys. And we've got a group reading plan through the Bible app. And so it's kind of cool because you're going through it together. You can see who's read it, who hasn't, so you can hold each other accountable. But also at the end of every section, it asks you, what did God speak to you today? Which is a really important piece. A lot of people will just go through and read it just to say that they read it. And they never ask themselves, what is God saying to me? Well, if you have to answer that question publicly every single day, you'll be amazed at what God says to you. So, and that's just something that I've been doing this last year, and it's really, really helped a lot. And then from there, we use another app called Echo, which has all of our prayer requests. So I've got personal requests in there, and then I've also got the group prayer requests. So I'll go through all those and pray for all those. Those first two things I do every single day.
Got it. So you do those first thing in the morning. I do something similar when I come down from getting ready for the day. While I'm getting breakfast, I'll do my Bible reading at that time. And I try to read through the Bible in a year. So I use those plans that help me read it in a year. I've done that the last 2 years. So I'm on year 3 of that. And I really like it. It just, I don't know, the day just feels better when I've done that.
Yes.
And then, and it's interesting how, like, I will do that. And then I go through a process of like checking out the projects that I have going and trying to figure out which ones of those I'm going to work on that day. And then I'll pray over that list. So it kind of all morphs together in some way. And I have to say, like, these 6 routines, I was really disappointed that this particular one on prayer and scripture was easily the shortest. It's like 1 paragraph, and he spells the others out in a lot more detail. But that one, he just kind of wrote quickly. It seems like it's like, you should know what this is. Like, okay, it's kind of, anyway.
Yeah.
I'm with you, though. It should be number 1 on this list.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's because there's this principle of first fruits. Okay. So first fruits is the first in place, time, order, or rank. Matthew 6:33 says, seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all of these things will be added unto you. What you are doing when you put prayer in scripture number 4 is you are seeking ye first all the things and then hoping that the kingdom of God will be added unto you. It doesn't work that way. There's another principle here in Psalm 19:7-8. It says, the law of the Lord is perfect, converting the soul. Your soul needs to be converted. You need to be sanctified. And when you put God first, what it does is it sanctifies the rest of the day. This is the most important Christian productivity principle you can get, is that when you do things God's way, it's a whole lot better than trying to do it your way. You have to ask him, what are the things that I'm supposed to do? Martin Luther famously said, I have so much to do, I shall spend the first 3 hours in prayer. Okay, and I'm convicted when I read that, because your initial reaction, your non-spiritual reaction is, well, I can't spend that much time putting God first. Like, doesn't God know I got a bunch of stuff I got to do? I got a job I got to go to, all that type of stuff. Well, it's really important, though, because you're 3 parts. You're a spirit, you have a soul, you're in a body. And you can live your life from the outside in, or you can live your life from the inside out. When you live life from the inside out, when your spirit is dominant, that's where things get really exciting. That's where doors are opened that no man can open. That's when the opportunities come that you could never create for yourself. So I personally believe that if you don't put this first, like, you are trying to do it of your own strength, your own ability, you're not surrendering completely and doing it God's way, he can't bless it, my personal opinion.
I feel like that's a good jumping off point for part 5 here, which is reduce. And we're going to talk about work-life balance here, or some people like to call it like a work-life tension, or some people just think it doesn't exist at all. And I needed this chapter, this section. And the one piece here that really stood out to me was something he called the ringing effect. He mentions that at like 90% capacity, one small movement can cause ripples through everything else that's going on. But if you're sitting at 75% capacity, a ripple simply adds to or subtracts from back and forth. So you have some wiggle room that you're able to operate. So essentially, you're building in buffer. But if you don't give yourself that buffer and one small thing changes, it can completely wreck your day. So, as an example, say I've got 8 hours in my workday and I plan 8 hours of work. That's fine, but I'm in web development. There's usually a bug or something that comes up every day. So if I plan it at 100%, that one little bug means I am going to either have to work late, or I'm going to be stressed, or I'm just going to not get something done, or be late and then stress. So nothing good comes from that. But if I had scheduled that day at 75%, if I've got an 8-hour day and I plan 6 hours of work, it's pretty easy for me to flex and add to that, or maybe get off work early that day. It frees things up, and it doesn't mean the entire day is going to be a complete disaster because I planned on having that buffer.
Yep, I completely agree. And I think, though, that this kind of gets back to the point we just left on why those things have to be in the right order, is because only God can tell you whether the things that you're doing are the right things. I mean, you can decide for yourself, but you got a much higher chance of being wrong.
Yes.
There are going to be seasons when you ask God, should I do this thing or this thing? And he'll say, yes, do both. That's kind of what got me into the situation that we're in. Now, that's just a season, though. And then you constantly have to be going back and saying, like, what is the right thing? What's best next? The very title of the book. I think that there's a lot of value that comes from asking that particular question. And you do have to build in that margin. You cannot be at 90% capacity all the time, because it's going to make everything a lot harder. That was one of the action items that I wrote down, was to plan my day for 75%. And I think that when I do it on paper and I block off at least an hour for all of the things that I'm going to do, like, it's a lot easier to hit that.
It makes me happy to hear you say you're doing things on paper.
Not everything.
We'll get there. We'll get you there. All right, let's go into part 6 here, which is execute. I'm just going to say I didn't care for this section.
Yep.
Really at all. It doesn't look like you cared for it either. I felt like this particular arena, had potential to be kind of a big deal. And I left this with the sense that he's trying to mash up a bunch of productivity tools and tips and tricks. Like, that's pretty much the entire section there.
Yep.
I have this as a note. If you ever wanted a mashup of all the major productivity books out there, this is it. Like, that's exactly what I felt like, especially in this section, is that he's basically reiterating GTD. He's reiterating things like the 12-week year to an extent. He reiterates a bunch of these systems and kind of jams them all together and doesn't really give anybody credit for their own thing. So,
yes,
if I have a hit on this book, that's it. You've got a bunch of stuff here that I feel like you should have attributed to other people, and he seems to have passed it off as his own thing, and that bugged me a lot.
Yep, I wrote down the section on big rocks, but no credit to Covey.
Right.
And that's just one example. In my opinion, by trying to mash together like everything that he's ever heard about productivity into this section, what it leaves you with is this sense of like, ugh, I can never do this. Like, it's way too complicated.
Right.
I would have much rather him distill this down into a couple points. And he kind of did that. He's got the pod analogy at the top, or acrostic, whatever: plan, organize, and do. But then from there, like, it quickly goes off the rails. Just as an example, like, he tries to be all things to all people at this section. He talks about managing email and the workflow, and he's got this big idea of touch at once, which I completely agree with. And then he kind of ends the chapter by saying sometimes the 2-minute rule doesn't work. And my note there is like, well, what do I do then? Like, you just told me do this, but it's not always going to work.
Right.
And then you're just like, oh, well, why should I do that then?
So I think we're in agreement. Although there are a lot of good things in this chapter, I think if you're new to it, which is what he's positioned this book as, is it's a book for people who are new to productivity. I think that section's hard. That's a tough one, and it's like, here, do this and do that and do this and do this, and there's not really any why behind why do those things work the way they do. And I kept hoping he would tie it back to the Bible in some way, and he didn't. So that particular section, I really struggled with it. So
yeah,
I'm glad he didn't end on that one.
He's got these different sections based on the dare thing that he comes up with at the very beginning. But I kind of feel like if he would have ended the book before he even went into dare, it would have been a lot better.
Fair enough. All right, last part. Living this out, the 4 dimensions of productivity and the overarching mission. And I'll let you explain the dimensions piece, but the mission part, I think we've gone over this a lot at this point. It's like your mission is something that, and I've got this as a quote too, your mission is discovered, not chosen. I wrote that down simply because so much of this book ties into the biblical mission of helping other people, doing good for other people, making disciples, and carrying out that mission that Christ gave us, that the way that you actually enact that and live that out is going to be unique to you. And the best way to determine what those things are and to actually be productive is get off your tail and get to work. And don't spend tons of time trying to figure out what you should be doing. Just get to work. If you're doing good, keep going. That's that was one of the big takeaways I had.
Yep, I completely agree with that, and I really like the emphasis of this section on the greatest cause in the world, the Great Commission, finding the need and meeting it. There's a couple things here though. He talks really the purpose of this section is to get you to think bigger, but he kind of focuses it on at the end an organization and kind of the thing that he is really invested in, which is great. Go ahead, pick your cause. But again, I have a nitpick here because I believe that the best thing you can do is not join a cause, but build the local church. I mean, the local church is God's baby. And so to say you got to be focusing on organizations and society, going back to the 4 dimensions of productivity, which I've got another minor rant there. But, the organizations and society, it shouldn't be some organization that you read about in a book that you're going to all of a sudden start giving to. If you're going to pick one thing to start giving to, it's got to be the local church. That's God's baby. And so I didn't really like that part. But then also going back to the 4 dimensions of productivity, he's got a distinction here between personal life and work life. When I read that, I was like, you got to be kidding me. I actually wrote in my notes, what happened to do all for the glory of God? There is no personal versus work. There's your life, and you have to manage this. Then you can think bigger about organizations and society. But that really rubbed me wrong when he broke those two apart at that point. Because I was like, okay, so I just felt kind of contradictory. I'm having to go back and reconcile everything that I'm reading in this book, and then it's almost like he wrote it at a different time, and he had a different revelations at different points when he was writing it. But this one in particular just was this doesn't make any sense given all the verses that you shared in the first part of the book about doing all for the glory of God. I could see you saying everything that you are doing personally, your individual life. Maybe that's the way I would have preferred he broke this down. It's individual, organizations, and society, just 3 dimensions of productivity. Does that make sense, or am I just being a jerk?
No, I don't think you're being a jerk. I think when he starts trying to spell out the 2 different arenas, it gets complicated and quick. And I can't say that I had the same guttural reaction that you did, but I knew that something didn't quite feel right. So I'm glad that you said something.
Okay.
So thank you.
Yeah. And I guess, if you were to put them in a particular order, you do have to take care of your personal stuff before your work stuff. But I just think that there really isn't a distinction there. It's an artificial distinction. And to view it that way is dangerous.
So overall, is there anything else on the book as a whole that you want to go over? We've spent quite a bit of time on it.
Yeah, so general thoughts. This isn't really a big deal, but this is a gospel-driven productivity book. So there's lots of quoting people, but lots of just referring to Bible passages. And I think it would have been a lot stronger if the scriptures that he's referring to would have been explicit in the book itself. And you could say, well, that would have added a lot of length to the book, but I feel like this is a paraphrasing of Scott Belsky, David Allen, Peter Drucker, and Jonathan Edwards anyways. So I put what's new here, not 324 pages.
Yeah.
So if I would have flipped those two around. I don't really care what what men say. I care what God says, especially if I'm picking up a book like this.
So action items, I've got 3. I'm going to go through 2, and then I'll come back to 3 after you've done yours.
Okay.
Is that fair?
Yep.
So number 1, I want to reevaluate my personal mission statement. I have one currently. I'm not super happy with it, but I want to reevaluate that. So that is on my to-do list. That is number 1. Number 2, I mentioned it earlier, I want to write out my life goals. In that kind of plays into like 3, 5, 10-year goals of some sorts. Like that's what I mean by that. Just because I don't have clear focus at those levels, and it would really help to have that. To your point, and the classic quote of, the plan isn't really worth anything, but the process of planning is everything. So that's exactly what I want to go through. So those are the 2 that I'll talk about right now that I want to do.
All right. Yeah. So I've got a couple that I want to implement right away. Planning the weeks at 75%. I really liked that idea. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think I've got the structure in place that I am able to do that. Another one I wrote down was give more than you get. And this is a principle that I stole from a friend of mine, Brandon Wentland, who is the president of Optimal Digital Marketing here in Appleton, Wisconsin. He's in my mastermind group, and he's the one who told me about that unique ability stuff. He has this quote that pops up in their Slack. It's the optimal Slack, and then it says, give more than we get. I think that's a really powerful principle, and I think that it really is at the heart of gospel-driven productivity and being others focused. And then the other one I've got on here, which is long-term, because I really have no idea how I'm going to make this work, but I really like the idea of a sabbatical. I'm not in a position right now in anything that I'm doing where I can just take off an extended period of time, but I'm going to be looking for an opportunity to do that, I think, because everybody that I know who's done this has said like it's the best thing they've ever done. Sean McCabe, who is the guy behind Sean West, talks about this all the time. Sean Blanc's talked about it. I just really like this idea, and I feel like I've got to give it a shot at some point. I just have no idea when that's going to happen.
Yeah, that sounds glorious. Okay, so the last action item that I have is readjusting my online presence. And the one thing that I didn't bring up earlier that I wanted to come back to was that working in productivity and writing for productivity, in the past, I have always tried to not let my faith be the driver for a lot of that, because I wanted to use that platform to reach pretty much anyone. I wanted it to be approachable to anyone so that it could eventually lead to some relationships, and maybe my faith would be able to have an impact on someone through those relationships. Like that's been a lot of my view towards my online audience. And I think that because of that, it's kind of a secular view of productivity. Because of that, and because it's been such a long time that I've been doing it that way, there's so much of that space that is so focused on me and my projects, and it has a strong focus on taking care of yourself. And it struck me when I read this book that that's not the point, and I'm coming at this completely wrong. Because if I'm not coming at this from a biblical stance, if I'm not coming at productivity from the Bible's viewpoint, then I have no other viewpoint other than my own personal mental state to come at it from. I think that's led me to a very negative headspace, at least my own perspective of that. I think that's where I've landed on it, and I don't like it. So as a result of reading this, I kind of want to shift and come at this, when I'm writing about productivity or I'm writing about some tip or trick or whatever it is I'm doing, I'm going to do my best not to filter it like I have in the past. And we'll see where that lands, how that all plays out. It might be offensive for some. I'm not going to apologize for that. But this is something that I want to start shifting to. And because I've been on it so long in the other way, this may be extremely difficult and long drawn out trying to get there. So that's what I know. I'm going to give it a shot. We'll see how it turns out.
Well, I can tell you from my experience, because I went through and wrote the book before I really got plugged into the productivity space. So my journey is a little bit different. But from the very beginning, I've basically been very explicit about my beliefs. I can't think of a single time that I've had a negative response to that. I've had a lot of people who have responded positively, by saying, thanks for speaking up. But I think the real key to this is to just be authentic. You're not preaching, you're sharing your experience, and your experience is influenced by your beliefs and the things that have happened to you. And I don't think you have to apologize for talking about your testimony, in essence, your message. Like, this is my personal experience. Nobody can disagree with that.
Thanks for that.
For sure.
All right. So let's wrap things up. So author style and rating. So I will agree with you on that. I didn't want to see tons of quotes. I felt like I was reading a mashup and a reiteration of a lot of things. There are a number of original points within that, I think, but I really struggled with the high volume of quotes, specifically from like 3 or 4 men that he looks up to and loves. It seems like if you go read those guys, like if you read their books, you get a lot of what he has here. I think when it comes to a rating, if I had stopped about maybe a third to half of the way through this, I was pretty jazzed up on it at that point and really liked the first third. And if I had stopped there, I would probably put it at a 4.5 at least. I would maybe struggle with putting that 5.0 on it at that point. But as the book continued, the more frustrated with it I got. And I felt like it really fell on its face for a while because of the constant reiteration and the speed with which he tries to jam a bunch of stuff in there. So I left having a very bad taste in my mouth at the end of all of that. So therefore, I am very conflicted as to how to rate this thing. So I'm going to land on a 3.5 for this, purely because I really liked the end and I really liked the beginning and I really hated a lot of the end and really wish he had left a lot of it out and just ended it after roughly halfway through. So 3.5 is where I'm going to land.
All right. So I don't want to make it sound like I absolutely hated this book because I think I've talked fairly negatively about several things that I've disagreed with here. I'm glad that it's written. I'm glad that it's been as successful as it has been. I really think that the idea of gospel-driven productivity is really, really important. Obviously, like I said, because I wrote a book on the topic also. And my book, if I were to go back and look at my book, I'm sure I would not rate it very highly at this point either. So I also want to frame this as like, I'm not comparing this to my book. I am reacting to the things that were taught and presented in this book. But there's a bunch of things in here that I didn't like. I feel like the gospel-driven productivity stuff is great. And then when you get into the practical stuff, it kind of is like backseat, even in the time map that he shares, because he shows how he mapped out his whole schedule. Like he's got on there church on Sunday mornings and then dinner time and family time, like every evening from 5 to 9. I'm looking at that and I'm like, wow, that would be cool. But I'm at church almost every night. And I'm not saying that to say like, well, I'm more spiritual or anything like that. But I just think like there's the general tone of this book is like, well, you can check the spiritual box and then you can go about your day. And I really don't think that that's true. I also think that there's some stuff in here that's not consistent. He got one of my favorite passages, like he didn't read it and check it against what the passage actually said. I'm going to have to go 3 stars.
So we got a 3 and a 3.5. I kind of was hoping for more,
which is a bit surprising. You know, when I dove into this, I was like, oh man, this is going to be a good book. And then felt like it just kind of went downhill from there, unfortunately.
Yeah, it happens. It's the life of reading books. All right. You're up next. What's our next book, Mike?
All right. So the next book is a listener recommendation, which I have right here. And it is Busy by Tony Crabb. And I have not started this one yet, but it is also not nearly as big as Paid to Think. So we will be able to get it done by next time.
Fair point. I'm interested in that one. It's interesting how we are hitting that one immediately after What's Best Next. So curious how that's going to play out. I have a listener recommendation following that one. The 3 Big Questions for a Frantic Family by Patrick Lencioni. I believe this is the first time we're doing a repeat author. Is that true? I think
yeah.
This is the first time we're reading a book by an author we've read before. So kudos to your wife, Mike, for recommending this one. So thanks, Rachel. We'll jump into it after Busy.
Yep. And then for Gap books, I've got Unique Ability 2.0 by a Strategic Coach, which I mentioned. This is a book which is accompanied by a workbook. And there's a couple different paths that you can take, but the essence is discovering your unique abilities. So the thing that only you are really, really good at. And then the idea being that if you can identify your unique ability, that's going to be the thing that is going to be valuable to the marketplace. And so Strategic Coach is a company that's built on the idea. It's one of those masterminds. You pay like, I forget, 20 grand or something to join it for the year. And then you go quarterly to Toronto, meet with Dan Sullivan and all these other entrepreneurs, CEOs. And everybody there is bought into this idea. And everybody there is coming into that space with the same growth mindset. And so, I mean, I know people who are involved in that. And like they've talked about how they've just been able to grow a ton, both personally and also their business by investing in something like that. So this is, you don't have to pay a bunch of money to to get Unique Ability 2.0. You can buy this off of Amazon if you're interested in it.
Got it. I'm actually going through a couple Gap books right now, one of which is The Inevitable by Kevin Kelly, understanding the 12 technological forces that will shape our future. Basically, what are the philosophical ideas that shape and lead our devices and the internet to what it will be in the future? It's very interesting. So anyway, that's one of them that I'm going through. The other, I will probably talk about a little bit in the upcoming episode, probably the next two, because I'm going to be taking a little more time to read this one. So I'm doing two of them at once. This is actually by Matt Perman that we just finished going over with What's Best Next. He has a new one coming out, How to Get Unstuck. And on a whim, I filled out his form for the pre-launch team and somehow got in. So I actually have an advanced reader copy of this. This book is not out yet. So that's kind of a new world to dive into. So yes, I'm interested in that one as well. But I'm hoping that he's learned more about how to write a book since the last time he wrote one. That's my hope. So yes, those are the two I'm working on.
Nice. And as Joe mentioned, the next two books that we're doing are listener recommendations. If you want to recommend a book, you can do that by going to bookworm.fm/list. And there will be a big button to recommend a book. And you'll also see a list of all of the books that are planned and the ones that are currently recommended, and even all the ones that are completed. So links to all of the previous episodes, and also links to buy the books on Amazon. So if you want to help us out, you can buy using those affiliate links, and we get a little bit from your purchase if you're going to read the book anyway. So thanks in advance for doing that.
If you want to help out in another way, you can do that with an iTunes review. Link in the show notes. That will help out tremendously. I think, Mike, are we still after KCRW?
Oh, yeah.
Is that still a campaign
for sure
you're wanting to promote?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So we're trying to beat KCRW in the podcast list when you search for Bookworm. Help us out, please. I did, and I think you kind of alluded to this. I had someone email me saying, hey, you put the books coming up next on your book list, but you don't put the Amazon links there so that we can help you out through those. And it was kind of a duh moment for me. So I did redesign slightly the book list at bookworm.fm/list. So you can go out and check that. The upcoming books are listed first, followed by the recommendations, and then the ones we've completed are down below those. But we have the Amazon links for absolutely all of them now, not just the ones that we've completed. So if you're looking for any of these books, or you're going to buy something from Amazon, we would love it if you'd use those links. It would really help us out, help pay for some of the hosting, and give us a little bit of a kickback. So that's how you could help us.
All right. So thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll see you next time.